Hello, students, and welcome to another screencast with Mr. Swan. And actually, I've been looking at it and looking at like our time left together. This is our fifth to last screencast together, unless I add more. So what we're doing today, we'll take a look at what relative dating of rock layers means. My activity for you is to work with some plant IDing apps. And let's go right on over to picture of the day, which is a little bit about plants, which is a little bit about glaciers, which is we talked about yesterday. So kind of fitting. So mapping green algal blooms in the Antarctic. Scientists are using satellite images to determine how much algae is growing on the Antarctic and trying to make a map of how much there is. These blooms are an important part of the ecosystem and food web. They also absorb a lot of carbon from the air. To make this map, the team got the European Union's Sentinel-2 satellite, which has a high-fidelity detectors that are sensitive in just the right part of the light spectrum to find the green algal blooms. They discovered over 1,700 patches of them. So this is over and happening in the Antarctic Peninsula. That's what this picture is over here on the right side. And that's the peninsula that went and connected to, at least at one time, to South America, which has now been broken apart. And that you can find out, see those like little dots on there, and that's where they're finding all these algal blooms. So they mapped most of the Antarctic Peninsula, but had a hard time plotting the red and orange algal blooms since the satellite camera detectors' spectral bands are not sensitive at just the right wavelengths for those particular blooms. So this is kind of like one of the flaws like in the study is that they know there's actually even more of them, and they're actually even bigger in amount, but it can pick up the greens. And the green's kind of like over into here, but these like orange parts, like right in the bottom of this the picture on the right side, and like kind of the reddish parts, it's just not able to pick those up. There are satellites that can do so, but those are not publicly available. This satellite, you're allowed to actually sign up for time for free to actually do science experiments. Other ones you would have to pay for, and you pay quite a bit. So they just kind of work with the tools that you have just at the time. So these blooms distribution is also heavily influenced by the proximity of seals, penguins, and other Antarctic birds, such as skuas, and the help of gulls. The poop from these creatures is a source of essential nitrogen and other elements, which the algal will actually need to bloom, which is pretty cool. So you can actually see like how much there's actually kind of going on. It's just one of those things that, you know, we kind of know that's going on in the Antarctic, and you're always kind of curious, like, hey, what can survive down there in conditions that are so extremely harsh? And if you have something that can survive in those conditions, which usually could be like a little bit drier, you know, you're getting kind of some glacial melt. Could those also lead to some good discoveries for maybe planets on or maybe moons, or maybe like some kind of like distant rock satellites out there in space that maybe if they can survive on that kind of environment, maybe they can survive in that other one as well. So it gives us an idea of like what we're kind of looking for. So sometimes like when we think of like life on Earth, you know, you think of very complex creatures. When we think of life maybe trying to find it in space, it would be cool if they were super complex like us, but higher chance that they're probably going to be more like the bacteria. So just some of the things you actually can go out and find. So let's get right on over to the notes. Relative dating of rock layers. Not too many more notes screencasts, but some good ones for you. So we have two different ways to kind of like date stuff. There's absolute dating and there's relative dating. Today we're just talking about relative dating. Absolute dating, which we will get into probably the next notes lesson, is about actual true numbers. So like this is absolute dating would be like this is 14,500 years old. Some kind of exact number. Relative dating is more an if and then comparatively to something, such as this object is older than that object, or but this object is actually now much younger than that object. And you're just trying to put things in the order to which that they happen. But how many years in between? A lot of times you actually can't really figure that out. You can, but just not exactly at the moment. So that's what we're doing. So rock layers can be a good guide for dating which geological event occurred first. Finding out the order of the events in the rock outcrop is possible by following a few geologic principles and laws. So we're just doing 3 to 5 or so principles. These are like the main 3 that we're I'm going to kind of highlight for you. The principle of superposition, original horizontality, and cross-cutting. So superposition usually is a pretty easy one to get. Things get buried into the ground, and then eventually something new and that's more younger actually goes on top of it. And so sometimes I like to think of it as like, let's say you're carrying the ball and you go out into the field and you're competing against another team and you score or win the big game, right? And then the whole team kind of like piles up on top of you, right? You were there first, so you're on the bottom. and then you have the closest teammates get to you next, right? So then they're in the like middle, and then teammates that were like really far away, like they just most recently got on top, and so like they're eventually the pile piles up, and then you're on the bottom being like, please get off, it's it's too much weight, and that's kind of what happens. So you have all these sedimentary rock layers, and they will form. So youngest goes on the top, and then the oldest goes on the bottom. And so when we see those, we're like, okay, well, this happened first, and then these progressively happened into more recent times. And it is just as simple as that. So superposition, just about being sane is old on the bottom and young in the top. Original horizontality. So this picture actually turned out to be a little bit of a difficult part of the preview sheet that people turned in. Out of all the things that people got wrong, this is definitely one of the highlights. I think it's the picture in particular. Is that this picture? If you were to go to this rock outcrop wall, this is what it looks like. You'd actually see like those lines of these rock layers, and they pretty much go straight up into the air. And so this is on the bottom with the camera kind of looking on up, and the younger layers are over here and the older layers are over there. So older layers don't have to be on the right and younger layers don't have to be on the left in this picture. It just happens to be that the youngest is over on this side and older is over on that side. It was easy to tell with fossils. You can tell the different older fossils are here, more younger species of fossils over here on the left side. So what this means is that you can't have layers form vertically. They have to go horizontally because all this sediment started as just like little tiny pieces of grains of, clay or silt or sand. And then, with wind and gravity, they generally form pretty horizontal. And it eventually over time, then they will solidify together and then kind of making these rock outcrops. You can't have just a pile of sand and it form into a vertical column that goes hundreds of feet up. It just can't happen. Imagine trying to go to the beach and taking like a handful of sand, dropping it, and then making like large columns that went like 10, 20 feet up in the air. It would be cool if it could happen, but that just can't happen. So these all formed horizontally, and then something flipped it. What is strong enough to flip a mountain? Only probably really two things: some kind of maybe massive tectonic movement, think like earthquake, that kind of idea, or maybe in this case, this rock outcrop was actually a little bit small enough. Maybe a glacier came on through, and that's ginormous in size. Remember, miles thick of ice, just in height, and then came through and then flipped it that way. So this gives you some clues. It says, well, this happened first. These fossils happened over here. Then these layers happened like in the middle, and then this younger ones happened. And then the most recent event, comparatively for this, is that something came through and rotated it. So that gives you an idea too of that something probably major happened, just the fact that these things are not originally horizontal. And that's what the principle of original horizontality is. Next one, principle of cross-cutting. So there was actually this photo I was thinking about showing you, but maybe it was too much. So I got this one instead, which I thought you might enjoy. This is a tiny little rock outcrop. It's probably one of the most famous ones that there actually is. Just from the coloring of the rock, makes it really nice. So you have this gray stone, you have this red one right here, and then you have this yellow one. And the idea for the principle of cross-cutting is that the feature that cuts into another feature would be the younger. So which means that you have this gray stone happen first, and then this red stone cut through it. And what this is actually an igneous intrusion. Igneous intrusion means like that melted magma is working its way on up, hot enough, and it's just working its way through a rock. And so it was able to cut through and melt its way through. So and it can't melt its way through and melt its way up into the air because it's a liquid unless there's already a rock there for it to kind of work its way up through. So you have this gray was first, and then you have this red one. And then eventually, the red cooled down and solidified. And then over time, now you have another yellow one that worked its way through. And that's why it looks like the yellow one is more continuous, is not broken up. So sometimes when you look at these, if you kind of think of it like, I don't know, sometimes I think of like paper, kind of like laying paper on top of each other. It's like, okay, well, you can see the yellow one completely. So that one's the ones that's on top. And then you see the one behind it. Well, that must be the red one. And then the one at the very, very bottom would be the gray one. So that's what we can take a look through. You have probably seen a fair amount of igneous intrusions just based on where we live. If you, in some of the best places to actually go and see some of these rock outcrops is just driving around. And if you're driving around and you're driving on the highways, when they built the highways and the highway systems, you go, not technically 100% true, but pretty close, in generally like a straight line. And like they're kind of making these highway systems to go in a straight line, and eventually they came up to an issue where they were going to hit like a mountain, right? And like you can't just like, I mean you could, I suppose, but you can't really just bend the highway kind of like right around and then kind of go straight through, because if you're driving really fast, it'd be hard to kind of like do those windy turns. It'd be a problem, so they tried to go like generally straight, and there's reasons for that, based on like who was building them. One of them happened to be the funding for them. One of them was like a 5-star general, and there's a whole neat backstory about why they're so straight as they are. Anyways, so what they do is they went right through the mountain, right? And so like when you see these and you're actually driving along, you might see like those ginormous kind of cliff faces against like the rock walls as you're going. And if you look very close, once you see these like really thin lines going down in, and that's where they drilled down and dropped the dynamite, and then they would blow up the rock, and then they make the road, and then everything's good. So a lot of times, like when you see a rock wall on the left and a rock wall on the right, you're actually driving like between or through technically a mountain. And so that's sometimes is a good spot to see some of these features. And if you're driving along, a lot of times, the rock will probably look grayish. Every once in a while, you might see like this kind of like darker band of rock. It's, maybe kind of go vertically up like this one. My red one is here. It might look black maybe. And that is actually an igneous intrusion that went right up through that rock and then eventually solidified and became an igneous rock. Unconformity. So this picture is like, this is actually a true unconformity. As a surface between two rocks that suggests that the deposition was not continuous and there was a gap in time. If you looked at this picture, you'd be like, okay, well the gap in time is probably between the two different types of rocks. It's right here. Between my little red one and my gray one. Now, if you were to go there and actually see, more rock outcrops of your life, you'll see rock outcrops of lots of different colors. Like maybe a gray one, then like a darker black one, then maybe like another red one. It's not always an unconformity right between those two different colored rocks. It just happens to be sometimes. And so when you look at them, and like this one, if you're looking at this picture, you might say, how can I tell? Like, how would you actually be able to tell just by looking at that rock that the unconformity is actually right there? And these weren't really deposited in a pretty sequential order. When I say sequential, I'm going to be like, maybe it's like 10 million years, then maybe like the next 5 million years. These gaps can be like 50 million years, 100 million years apart, which means that, rock was depositing. And then in unconformity, maybe something came through and swept it away or destroyed it all, or some kind of like major Earth event that didn't allow a rock to be deposited there anymore. And eventually, over time, something changed and it could be deposited anymore. So these gaps of time can be millions and millions and millions of years. But how can you tell by just looking at it? And the answer is you can't, unless you actually go there. And if you go there, and you might actually see some fossils inside. And so the fossils actually will kind of give you a hint of like, hey, there's a ginormous amount of rock in there that's missing. And I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit to this picture. And this is sometimes why we kind of go through and look at them, is that, this is actually something that happened over in South Carolina. There's a rock outcrop in Virginia. There was another one. And you can kind of take a look at through the different parts where they found the different species, and you see the species actually kind of like evolving over time and changing. And it's like, oh, it went through 3 sets. And then, but if you went over in Virginia and just look at that rock, you'd only see that it went through 2 sets really of like this kind of change. And so that means the unconformity is right there. And how you do that is you match up the 2 rock groups, like this, my light pink color to my light pink color, and my reddish color, which I'm sorry, this like this little black bar down here is kind of blocking it, but my reddish color to the other reddish color, and then you see like it will kind of make like a little bit of a triangle, and that triangle points to where that rock outcrop should be, but is not. It is gone for some reason. Sometimes we can figure that out. Sometimes we never actually do. So that's why it's important, and that's why people do this. So they study these rock outcrops pretty much everywhere, and then they always compare to each other. Because if you just went to Virginia and you just took a look, you would actually see like, hey, I don't even see where this outrock actually could be. It's just actually missing. So that's where these 2 things that are connected, the 2 types of fossils, you connect them in kind of like this rectangular-ish box. And then as you start to connect them, you'll notice that these like little triangles start to form all by themselves. So I draw my box from number 6 to number 6, and number 4 to number 4, and number 3 to number 3, that eventually my number 5 becomes a little triangle, and then it's like, oh, it points right there, and that wavy line is usually what we write for an unconformity. But if you were to just go to this one and just look at this one, you would have no idea an unconformity was actually even there. So if you're like, how could I tell? Like, how could I do it? Don't feel bad about it. It's just not possible sometimes in pictures. So you actually sometimes have to go there, and not just go there, but also confer with other people to figure out what is actually missing. When you actually go there and you actually draw out these rock outcrops, this is an example of one of the diagrams that you would actually make for it. It is not maybe the most artistic-y skill of all time. I think artistic-y is a word. And it is supposed to just be a kind of a quick sketch of what's going on, and then you try to put the order of sequence back in order. And we have the designs, and we'll talk about this some more time. Designs, I kind of tell you like, hey, the rock over here, my rock A, that has all these little dots in it. Usually we call that sandstone. One that kind of looks like a whole bunch of bricks. That's what we call limestone. The ones with the dashes for letter C, as soon as that my little hover black bar here goes away, right? The blue one with the little dashes, that is shale. And then D, this kind of gray one with these like sidewaysy looking lines that are all in every direction, that would be an igneous intrusion. So eventually some kind of magma worked its way on up, eventually over to the surface. And then the idea is like how to put them in order. So if you look at it, you'll be like, okay, well, this is what you would actually draw if you were actually out there. And you can kind of see, you'll be like, okay, well, the first thing that kind of stands out, at least to me, is that E cuts everything in half. And that's a pretty continuous cut. And I'm like, okay, well, that's probably the most recent thing. And that E would be the only thing that can take two rocks and shear it apart like that, would probably be an earthquake. And then you use the law of superposition to kind of put the first three in order. That would be like, well, C, B, and A. So C's on the bottom, then B, and then A. Kind of makes sense, right? So you had like the shale gets deposited, then limestone, and then the sand. And then you take a look and you'd be like, okay, well, E cuts through D too. And D had cut through C, B, and A. So that means D now falls in the middle. So it goes C, B, A, then D cuts all the way through. And then you have my last little part here, which is kind of hard to imagine. But if you had an igneous intrusion, and it's working its way through the ground, right? And somehow it makes its way probably to the surface, it probably just wouldn't stop and become totally flush with the surface like it is doing right up here. Right? It would probably bubble over, right? And make some kind of like plume on the ground. That did not happen here. So that means it probably did happen, but it's gone now. So that means that something came through, maybe like weathered it away, some kind of natural event. And so this would be our unconformity right here, where F is. And then eventually E cuts all the way through everything. And so then you kind of get your list. I put that right for you at the bottom right. So it goes C, B, A, where deposited. Then you have like this igneous intrusion, which was D. Then you have some kind of unconformity event that happened over in F. And then E, which is that fault line cuts right through. Now, can you tell how many years there are between these? You know, was it after the unconformity happened? Was it 1 million, 2 million, 3 million years before the E fault line happened? You can't really tell. Not in this case. So this is what they talk about, just relative order. So you know what's oldest and what's youngest, but you don't know the amount of actual time in between. It's kind of like maybe just like if we were together in the same room, I'd be like, oh, it's just like, you know, me and you. You are younger than I am. But how much in actual time, actual days, it's a little more of a fuzzier kind of area. And so that's why we kind of go into our correlating rock layers, and you can correlate these rock layers not just with animal fossils. Some of the best ones we have are called index fossils. I'll save that for a little bit of a different day. But those are species that are really, really abundant in numbers, which means they were, for one time period in the world, they thrived. They were everywhere. There was like a ton of them. And then they lived over a large period of area. So there's a whole bunch of them. They were all over the place. And then something happened and they all died off and they're just gone. And so we call those index fossils because when you find those fossils all over the place, that gives you actually a base timeline of where those things are. So if you were to find an index fossil like here and here, where my number 3 section is, be like, oh, well, that rock is actually the same time period, which could maybe be hard to do on other circumstances. So that's why I call it the index fossils, the bittersweet fossils, because it's really helpful for like a geological perspective of figuring out where things are. But for like a biology, for biology and biological perspective, those animals are gone. And a lot of times, and for some cases, and I'll show you examples of this, we only have the shells left. We don't even know what was inside the shells. And so we just don't know. And so we'll probably never will. So other things you can actually do. You should have this succession of fossils. You should have older fossils on the bottom. And like, I didn't really bring this up in particular, but you should have older fossils down here. You should have younger fossils on the top. That's how I was able to figure out if this rock wall, younger is on the left in this case, and the older one was actually on the right, just by dating the fossils. And that is kind of going to finish us up on this. So there's not really too much to do. I'm not really going to give you like an activity based on this one. Usually, if we were together, usually I have like these drawing activities for you to kind of do. I'll have maybe a different fossil one for you to kind of work on like a little bit later. But I figured, to kind of change things up and try to get you back outside, I thought you would be nice to look at. Star app was good for looking at in the sky for stars that I had you do a little while ago. This one is a plant identification app. A little bit of a different idea, but same kind of thing. And I figured we'll go around over to that one. So what you're going to do with that, I might as well just tell you now, is I just want you to go out and try to just give it a use. It's useful to have like on your phone if you ever want to try to like go identify something. And if you're not like, if you've never really done it, you're like, not really good at identifying trees. This is a really good kicking off point. These apps are not perfect. I don't even have, in all fairness, one in particular to recommend because some seem to work really well for like a tree, and then if it doesn't really work, I say just go download another one and try it. And sometimes those ones actually work better. So they all have their pluses and minuses, and the reason why is because they are relying on people to take photos of those plants, leaves, and flowers, and then they build these massive databases from them. And then you take a photo of your leaf. It tries to match this up, like the x-axis and the y-axis, and like how many points, and it does like a little area calculation. No joke, it's mostly just math. And then it takes that to the bank of leaves it already has, matches up to a whole bunch of those, and says, hey, this one matches up generally with this group. And people in this group said this is a maple tree. And so then it gives you the term maple thing back. So are they perfect? No, because if you're not really sure and you thought like something was a maple tree and you put that in there, you're into the data set, then it kind of messes up the data set a little bit. So it can never be totally perfect, but it gives you kind of like a good jumping off point. It's something kind of fun to just walk right around with and see how well it works. So I did that in my yard outside with my wife, and I thought I would show you a couple of them just that we did. But and then what I want you to do is go out and give it a try. If you can, if you have the ability to, and then that's about it, really. And just can kind of enjoy the day then. All right, so signing off on this one. I will see you in just a second as I jump over to the phone screen and show you some of those. All right, bye. Welcome back to Swan's Plant App Review. We'll do this one in 4 minutes or less. So using my wife's phone to download this for the first time as well, the app that I kind of like is Plant Snap. But in all reality, they're all kind of the same. So you can kind of pick whatever one you like. They almost even work really the same. And we'll kind of go through it as this downloads. The Plant Snap app, a little bit different than some of the other ones, is that you need to make an account. Usually all these and all the plant identification apps should be free. And that's a good thing for us. But you could always pay for them, I guess, if you want to. But there's no real reason to. A lot of times they're even pulling from the same data set. So you got to make an account. So instead, let's use this one called PlantNet. And the same thing as before, you open it, you download it, and they have an Android and an Apple version as well. And the neat part about some of these apps is that they kind of become a social network. So all these are pictures taken by people. They put their names up. You don't have to. And people talk to each other about plants and actually taking pictures of plants. So kind of going right outside, me and my wife went right out, and this is one that's appearing in probably lawns all over yards, maybe in the kind of the outs, not usually where you mow, but kind of like off to the side. Usually starts as like a little bit of kind of like this purple shoot that comes up, then really makes these really big kind of bushy kind of leaves. And first try, and it totally worked. This is milkweed. Butterflies, love this stuff. So usually I try to leave some of these around the kind of outskirts of my lawn, and we have like a little makeshift butterfly garden. And so they usually really kind of enjoy those. So if you like butterflies, leave those ones around. Once you kind of get going with this, you'll start seeing a whole bunch of them. They work for flowers as well. And really what's going on here is that you're getting and taking pictures and then making a whole bunch of like XY coordinates all across those pictures that you can't see, but the data collection software is actually doing that. And then it tries to match those on up. So really for my little mini flower ones here, it's not really sure what to make from those because they're really tiny. There's not really a lot of kind of data in them, and it might be right, might be not be. Same thing with some of these leaves. So here's a tree we went out to right in my backyard, and you take a picture of the leaves, and you probably already know that is a maple tree just by the shape of the leaf. But what type of maple is it? If you take a picture in the app, even sometimes it has a little trouble. So usually it'll give you like a couple of them. So even the first result is not always the most correct one. Here, most commonly known as a sugar maple. It's everyone's favorite maple type of leaf. And so you can actually tap those and get some maple syrup from them eventually. Once you kind of really start doing this, you'll start to find a whole bunch of them. Me and my wife call this one the alien plant. And we're like, while we were going out and taking videos of this, we're like, oh, the alien plant. Let's go. So we ran over this one and took a picture of it. I totally forgot that we could even do that for that one. And I wasn't sure if it would work. I didn't know what category to select, so I hit leaf. There are no really leaves on this one. It's like a long green shoot that comes right out of the ground. It has this like spiky top at the very top. And that one is called a horsetail. Who would have known? Not me. Not without one of these things. So what I find really interesting about these is that it's just a nice tool to kind of have in your pocket that you might see and might use, on a normal day basis, out and about. You might see something like, hey, what is this? And you might take a picture of it and you'll be like, oh, and it's kind of neat to go around and take some photos of some of these plants. And then once you had no idea, but you've seen all your time of your life, you might actually figure out what the name is. So I hope you enjoyed. I hope you guys have a good time with that app. So my assignment for you is to just try to see if you can get one. You don't have to pay for them. You can try to take and look at multiples of these. There's tons of different versions of them. And find one, maybe go give it a shot or two. Maybe bring a parent with you. It might be fun. And give you a good excuse to go outside. And do it before it gets kind of hotter in the afternoon. And it might be a storm rolling down through. So this is definitely a good morning activity. So besides that, hope you have a good day, and I will see you for the next lesson. All right. Goodbye.